This is the largest free speech event, probably one of the largest events Britain's ever had. We're looking at near 1 million people out here. I'm seeing some of the reports. Why was it important for you to be here today for this?
Unity, bringing the country together, bringing communities together, bringing cities, towns, people together, and also reconfirming or reinstalling our British culture, our British identity, which has been eradicated over the last 10 to 20 years. So, British pride out there. This is what the country's all about. The backbone of Britain is out there at the moment, and it's about time that people realise that our culture and our identity comes first, because that gives us purpose, it gives us a drive, it gives us a focus to work towards, and the moment that that's taken away, then we descend into chaos, into anger, into violence. So I'm here to unite everyone, but also to announce officially that I'm running for Mayor of London in May 2028.
Now, I walk through London on multiple occasions, and what I see in London, I see British culture, but I don't feel it. I haven't felt it for years. However, today, walking past Big Ben, looking at the flags, looking at you lot, I felt that British pride, British culture at the very forefront because of you lot. It's because of us British patriots that I felt British culture come alive today in London than I've felt in a very, very long time. Something we must not let the establishment eradicate. Our British culture, we should be proud of it, and it is right in front of me. It's us, it's you.
Keir Starmer thought his biggest problem this week was inflation, but then came Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson like a political storm tearing through Westminster. What happened next wasn't just a debate, it was a demolition. Ant didn't show up to chat politely. He showed up like a soldier walking onto enemy ground, carrying truth bombs instead of weapons. And Tommy? He brought the crowd. Thousands gathered, shouting for freedom, demanding their country back, while Starmer stood frozen, blinking like a man who realised too late that he had walked into a trap. This wasn't a policy disagreement. This was the moment Labour's weak foundation cracked in full public view. It started like a normal day in Starmer's carefully controlled world of polished speeches and scripted sound bites. He was rehearsing the same lines about responsibility and steady leadership, the ones he repeats so often that even his advisors have started lip-syncing behind him. But outside the polished glass doors of Labour HQ, a movement was gathering that no advisor could spin away. Tommy Robinson's rally was not just loud, it was thunder. It was a wave of frustration from ordinary people sick of being silenced, sick of watching their country slip away while their leaders sip wine in Westminster. And right there in the middle of it all, marching with the same intensity he once carried into war zones, was Ant Middleton. Now Ant is not a politician, he's not some polished media figure. He's a man who has stared death in the face, who has dragged broken bodies out of battlefields, and who knows the meaning of leadership in its rawest form. And when he looked at Keir Starmer's Labour, he didn't see leadership. He saw cowardice. He saw a government scared of free speech, terrified of the people, and obsessed with silencing dissent instead of listening to it. And he said it loudly, in front of the crowd and the cameras. If this was a battlefield, Starmer wouldn't last 5 minutes. He would be too busy forming a committee to name the operation while the enemy walked right through him. The crowd erupted, because it wasn't just a punchline, it was the truth. Starmer, meanwhile, was trying to pretend none of this was happening, but he couldn't escape it. The videos of Ant and Tommy speaking spread like wildfire online. TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere you looked, clips of Ant calling out Labour's failures were being shared, memed, and replayed millions of times. People who had never even cared about politics were suddenly watching and nodding. Why? Because it wasn't the usual dull Westminster debate. It was raw, it was honest, and it was what the public had been screaming for. Someone to finally stand up and say that Labour's obsession with immigration, with shutting down voices, with drowning the people in bureaucracy, is destroying the country. Ant went for the jugular. He called out Labour's weak stance on national security, their inability to control Britain's borders, their cowardly policies on crime. He painted a picture of a government that doesn't protect its people, but lectures them instead. And when Tommy Robinson took the microphone, he turned the rally into a roar. "This government doesn't care about you," he shouted. They care about Brussels, they care about their careers, but they don't care about Britain. The crowd exploded, waving flags, chanting, and drowning out the last fragile threads of Labour's credibility. Starmer's collapse wasn't a quiet fall. It was live, brutal, and merciless. For years, he has hidden behind cautious words, behind committees and panels and reports. But in one single rally, Ant and Tommy tore off the mask. They showed him for what he is, a man terrified of the people he is supposed to lead. And the people saw it, they felt it. For the first time in months, they weren't just frustrated, they were energised. The silence that Labour had forced on them was shattered by a rallying cry that echoed across the nation. Ant's words cut deeper because they came from experience. He spoke about frustration turning into anger, anger turning into unrest, and unrest breaking into violence if leaders don't wake up. He reminded Britain that ignoring the people is dangerous, that silencing voices is the first step toward chaos. And as he said it, thousands nodded, knowing he was right. Because every time Starmer dodges a question, every time Labour promises reform but delivers nothing, every time ordinary people are told to stay quiet, that anger grows. Ant didn't create it, he simply voiced it. And here's the truth, Keir Starmer could not handle it. While Ant and Tommy stood strong, commanding the rally with fire and clarity, Starmer was nowhere to be seen. His team had told him not to engage, not to give the rally legitimacy. But by staying silent, he made it worse. He looked weak. He looked scared. And in politics, weakness is blood in the water. The internet turned savage. Memes of Starmer hiding in his office while Ant marched with the people flooded social media. One clip of Ant saying, "He's got no drive, no ambition, no backbone," went viral overnight, shared by millions who laughed, cheered, and shouted in agreement. Labour's great leader, the man who wanted to project strength, was reduced to a punchline. And as the rally grew, it wasn't just about free speech or immigration, it was about leadership itself. Britain looked at Starmer and saw a bureaucrat. Then they looked at Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson and saw men who weren't afraid to speak, men who weren't afraid to fight for something. The contrast was devastating. For Starmer, it was the beginning of the end. For Labour, it was the nightmare they thought they could avoid. Because when the people rise and when leaders fall, it doesn't happen quietly. It happens in rallies, in chants, in viral videos, and in moments when someone finally stands up and says what everyone else is too afraid to say. And that's exactly what Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson just did. They tore down the last illusion of Keir Starmer's leadership and exposed the truth for all to see. Labour is not leading Britain, it's dragging it down. The rally didn't die down, it grew. The noise carried from the square into the streets, from the streets into the newsrooms, and from the newsrooms straight into Number 10's panic chambers. What was supposed to be just another protest suddenly looked like a movement, loud, organised, and impossible to silence. Ant Middleton wasn't just talking to the crowd anymore, he was talking to the whole country. And when he looked into the camera and said, "This government doesn't represent you," millions at home felt like he was speaking directly to them. Keir Starmer's advisors tried their usual tricks. They pushed out bland press releases, telling the media that the Labour leader was focused on serious governance, while others played populist games. But nobody was listening. The clips of Ant's takedown were everywhere, and the press releases landed with all the weight of a wet tissue. People weren't in the mood for PR spin, they were hungry for truth. And the truth was simple. Starmer looked weak, Labour looked finished, and the rally looked unstoppable. Tommy Robinson doubled down. Standing beside Ant, he shouted, "This isn't just a rally, this is Britain saying enough is enough." The words rippled through the crowd like fire through dry grass. People who came out curious ended up chanting. People who came out silent ended up shouting. The energy was contagious, electric, and impossible to contain. The chants weren't just against Labour anymore, they were against the entire political establishment. And at the heart of it all was the humiliating image of Starmer, absent, hiding, invisible, when his country was demanding answers. Labour MPs scrambled. Some tried to defend him on TV, but it backfired. One MP muttered something about far-right agitators, and within minutes, Ant blasted it on stage. Far-right? For speaking the truth? For defending free speech? For wanting borders that work? If that's far-right, then the entire country is far-right, because everyone I speak to says the same thing. The crowd erupted, and online, people laughed at Labour's desperate smear tactics. Every insult they threw only made Ant and Tommy stronger. Then came the numbers. Polls dropped like bombs. Overnight, Labour's support in the so-called Red Wall collapsed by double digits. Reform surged. Even traditional Labour voters were saying it. "I don't agree with everything Tommy says, but at least he's not afraid to speak. That single sentiment spread like wildfire. People were tired of polished lies, tired of scripted apologies, tired of leaders who couldn't look them in the eye. And Starmer, the man who built his brand on safe, steady leadership, suddenly looked like a paper tiger. Ant's military background made his words sting harder. He spoke about missions where hesitation cost lives, about leaders who freeze when decisions matter most. If your leader can't act under pressure, he said, he's not a leader, he's a liability. And as he said it, the image of Starmer dithering at a podium, dodging yet another straight question, replayed in everyone's minds. The comparison was brutal, and it stuck. Meanwhile, the media couldn't ignore it anymore. What started as a fringe event was now dominating headlines. Broadcasters who once mocked Tommy Robinson were forced to admit this rally had shaken the establishment. Ant Middleton's blunt words were being replayed on primetime television. Every news channel showed Starmer's silence next to Ant's booming critique. The contrast was devastating. Britain didn't just see a rally, they saw a choice. Inside Labour HQ, the panic turned to chaos. Advisors argued over whether Starmer should confront the rally directly or continue ignoring it. Some wanted him to call a press conference, but others warned he would get destroyed on live TV if asked about immigration or free speech. And so, predictably, Starmer chose the safest option. He did nothing. He hid. And that single decision, or lack of decision, became the story. Too scared to face the people, headlines read. The memes kept coming. One viral clip showed Ant saying, "Starmer has no backbone," cut together with footage of jelly wobbling on a plate. Another showed Tommy leading chants with the caption, "The real leader of the opposition." The internet was unforgiving, and every joke landed because deep down, people knew it wasn't just humour, it was reality. Labour was being laughed out of the room. What made it worse was the timing. Britain was already struggling, crime rising, migrants flooding in, bills higher than ever, and ordinary families feeling abandoned. People were desperate for someone to speak their pain out loud. And then came Ant Middleton, a soldier turned truth-teller, doing what politicians refused to do. He wasn't polished, he wasn't careful, he wasn't trying to be liked. And that's exactly why people listened. Starmer's allies begged him to make a strong statement, to show he was still in control. But he didn't. Instead, he gave a pre-written interview to a friendly newspaper, filled with bland lines about unity and moving forward. Nobody cared. The story had already moved past him. The rally had exposed him, and his failure to respond sealed his fate. Because here's the brutal truth. In politics, perception is reality. And the perception now was that Keir Starmer wasn't a leader at all. He was a shadow, a man scared of the people, hiding behind bureaucracy while the country burned. Meanwhile, Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson were being cheered like folk heroes, not because they had all the answers, but because they had the courage to say what everyone else was thinking. For Labour, it wasn't just a bad day, it was a turning point. The Red Wall voters who carried them into power were slipping away. The middle-class voters who wanted stability were laughing at Starmer's cowardice. The young voters who once saw him as a safe alternative were flocking to social media, resharing clips of Ant and Tommy like they were the only ones telling the truth. The tide was turning, and once it turns, no polished speech can bring it back. And in the middle of it all, as the chants echoed and the memes spread, one question hung in the air like smoke after a battle. How long can Keir Starmer survive before the collapse becomes official? The rally had ended, but the movement didn't stop. Clips of Ant Middleton's fiery words and Tommy Robinson's chants had already spread to every corner of the nation. By the next morning, Britain was buzzing. Pubs, workplaces, and even classrooms were talking about one thing: Keir Starmer's humiliation. And unlike the usual political chatter that dies within hours, this one had staying power because it hit where it hurt most: leadership, credibility, and trust. Starmer's opponents smelled blood. Reform UK immediately capitalised, blasting out campaign posters showing Ant Middleton's quotes beside Starmer's awkward photos. Nigel Farage jumped in, tweeting that the people have finally spoken and calling the rally the moment Labour lost its mask. Even the Conservatives, who were just as terrified of the growing movement, quietly admitted that Labour had been mortally wounded. Behind closed doors, senior Tories were laughing, not because they were strong, but because Starmer was so visibly weak. And then came the polling catastrophe. A new survey showed Labour not just slipping, but collapsing, down nearly 15 points in working-class strongholds. Reform was rising faster than ever. Commentators who once mocked Tommy Robinson were now forced to acknowledge the scale of the revolt. Whether you agree with him or not, one political analyst admitted on live TV, you can't deny that he's captured a mood in the country that Keir Starmer completely missed. That single sentence was like a dagger through Labour HQ. The narrative had shifted, and once it shifts, no speech can pull it back. Starmer himself looked broken. His rare public appearances became awkward theatre. In one press conference, he was asked directly, "Why are you scared to face the people at Tommy Robinson's rally?" He stuttered, dodged, and muttered something about not engaging with extremists. But the damage was already done. The clip went viral, cut together with Ant Middleton saying, "No backbone," replayed over and over until the image of Starmer flinching became the symbol of Labour's collapse. Meanwhile, Ant Middleton wasn't backing down. He went on podcasts, TV interviews, and live streams, repeating his message with even more intensity. Britain is broken, leadership has failed, and silence is no longer an option. "I've seen men break under pressure," he said in one fiery broadcast. "And I'm telling you now, Keir Starmer has already broken. He can't lead himself, let alone a country." The words struck like bullets, and each one hit its target. Tommy Robinson amplified the pressure. He announced another rally, bigger, louder, in the heart of London. This time, tens of thousands promised to show up. The government scrambled, police prepared, and Labour strategists panicked. Because they knew every new rally meant another wave of humiliation for Starmer. Every chant was another reminder that the people were no longer afraid. The streets told the real story. Ordinary Britons, who once shrugged at politics, were now openly mocking Labour. Taxi drivers, shopkeepers, factory workers, people who rarely cared about Westminster gossip, were suddenly tuned in, repeating Ant's lines like gospel. Starmer's got no drive, no ambition, no backbone. It spread like wildfire, simple, sharp, and devastating. And the more Labour tried to fight it with their polished messaging, the more ridiculous they looked. The press turned brutal. Headlines that once gave Starmer cover now tore him apart. "Labour in freefall," screamed one. "Middleton and Robinson expose Starmer's weakness," said another. Even The Guardian, usually friendly to Labour, admitted his silence had created a vacuum filled by louder, braver voices. That word, vacuum, haunted Labour like a curse. Because it was true, leadership hates a vacuum, and Ant and Tommy had filled it perfectly. Behind the scenes, Labour MPs whispered about rebellion. Some wanted Starmer to step aside before the damage became permanent. Others feared that even replacing him wouldn't stop the bleeding. And in hushed tones, a chilling question surfaced. What if reform actually overtakes Labour in the next election? A thought once unthinkable was now being debated in serious rooms by serious people. The internet, as always, was merciless. New memes showed Starmer hiding behind curtains as Ant and Tommy marched past with crowds behind them. One viral video spliced together Starmer's long-winded speeches with footage of Ant, yelling, "Execute, act, lead." The contrast was unbearable. It wasn't just that Starmer was mocked, it was that people stopped seeing him as relevant at all. He wasn't leading, he was shrinking. And all the while, Ant and Tommy kept hammering the same message. Free speech, secure borders, and leadership that doesn't hide. They didn't need detailed policies, they only needed to highlight Labour's failures. And every time they did, the people nodded harder. Because when a country is frustrated, it doesn't care about fine print, it cares about strength. And Starmer, tragically for Labour, had none. The cracks turned into fractures. Local councils reported Labour members quitting. Trade unionists openly criticised the leadership. Party loyalists, who once defended every decision, were suddenly silent. And in the pubs and streets of Britain, a dangerous phrase began to spread. Maybe Labour is finished. That's the nightmare no politician wants to hear. Because once the people believe it, it becomes reality. And in that moment, as rallies grew, polls dropped and memes flew, it was clear. Keir Starmer wasn't just having a bad week. He was facing the total collapse of his career. By the time the sun set on Starmer's last stand, it was no longer a question of if his leadership would collapse. It was only a matter of when. Britain wasn't waiting for Labour to explain itself anymore. The people had already made up their minds, and the verdict was brutal. Starmer had been weighed, measured, and exposed as hollow. Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson hadn't just criticised him. They had ripped apart the carefully constructed image Labour had spent years building. What remained was a man stripped of authority, mocked by his opponents, doubted by his allies, and abandoned by the very voters who once trusted him. The rally in London became the defining symbol. Tens of thousands filled the streets, their chants echoing through Parliament like thunder. "Resign, resign, resign," they shouted, as Ant Middleton delivered his sharpest attack yet. Leadership means sacrifice. Leadership means courage. And I'm telling you, Keir Starmer has neither. He hides while you suffer. He dithers while the country burns. And if he cannot face you, then he cannot lead you. The words hit like artillery, shaking the political landscape far beyond the crowd itself. Even hardened Labour loyalists watching on TV felt the sting of truth. Tommy Robinson followed, his voice raw and fierce, hammering Starmer on free speech and immigration. This government wants to silence you. They call you names for speaking up. But today we prove they can't silence all of us. Today we show them that Britain will not bow down. The chants grew louder, the flags waved higher, and the cameras captured every second of Labour's humiliation. Inside Labour headquarters, panic turned to despair. Advisers stopped arguing and started whispering about damage control for an inevitable resignation. Some MPs quietly drafted letters of no confidence. Others plotted for leadership bids, but none of it mattered. The truth was already out. Labour had lost control of the narrative. Starmer wasn't a leader anymore. He was a liability. Then came the ultimate blow, a live televised debate request. Reform and the Conservatives both challenged Starmer to face Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson in an open forum. Of course, it was political theatre, but refusing the challenge would look weak, and accepting it would be political suicide. Labour tried to stall, but the pressure mounted until Starmer had no choice. He appeared, pale and exhausted, standing at a podium under the hot studio lights. The outcome was a disaster. Ant spoke with clarity, conviction and fire, weaving military grit with common-sense truths. Tommy brought the voice of the people, unpolished but raw, demanding answers on immigration, crime and free speech. And Starmer, he blinked. He hesitated. He stumbled over prepared lines that sounded robotic in the face of real passion. Every time he dodged a question, the crowd groaned. Every time he looked down at his notes, the cameras zoomed in on his weakness. It was a slaughter, broadcast to millions. Within hours, headlines screamed across every platform. Starmer crushed in brutal debate. Middleton and Robinson humiliate Labour leader. Collapse now inevitable. The public had seen enough. They didn't need spin. They didn't need excuses. They had witnessed the downfall with their own eyes. The next morning, protests spread nationwide. Not violent, not chaotic, but relentless. Town squares filled with people chanting for Starmer's resignation. Social media turned into a wall of mockery. Memes comparing him to jelly. Cartoons portraying him as a man hiding under his desk while the nation roared. Even his allies stopped defending him. Silence spoke louder than loyalty. Starmer's collapse became official when senior Labour MPs, one by one, went on camera to say the words no leader wants to hear. It's time for change. By evening, the resignation letter was drafted, the press conference scheduled. The man who promised strong, steady leadership ended up leaving in the most unsteady fashion imaginable, hounded out by rallies, memes, and the blunt truths of men who weren't afraid to speak. And so, the curtain fell. Keir Starmer, once hailed as Labour's saviour, ended as a punchline, destroyed not by polished opponents in Parliament, but by a soldier with battle scars and a rally led by a man the establishment tried to silence. Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson had done what the Tories could not, what the media never dared. They exposed the emptiness at the heart of Labour's leadership. The message to Britain was clear, and it echoed far beyond Westminster. Leadership is not about polished words, but about courage, conviction, and the ability to stand up when it matters most. Starmer failed that test. He collapsed under the weight of truth, and his downfall will be remembered not as a quiet resignation, but as a brutal takedown that left Labour in flames. Because when leaders hide, the people rise. And on that day, in that rally, the people rose with Ant Middleton and Tommy Robinson, and they never looked back.